Good afternoon. Welcome to the latest ICCT webinar. My name is Joe Schultz. I'm the Communications Director of the ICCT. In a moment, I'll turn the microphone over to Peter Mock, the Managing Director of ICCT Europe and the editor of the European Vehicle Market Statistics Pocketbook, which is the subject of today's presentation. Before I do that, a couple of brief housekeeping details. I will keep them very brief. And then a word or two about the Pocketbook. The presentation, the webinar today will be organized in a kind of a three-part format. First, a brief presentation, then some highlights from the 2013 edition of the Pocketbook, and then a presentation of the structure of a companion website, which we've built, which Peter's built really for this. We'll take questions after each part of the presentation. But right now, all attendees are in listen-only mode. And that's really just to preserve audio quality. We invite you to ask a question at any point in the presentation using the chat pane in your control panel. If you would like to be unmuted so you could ask your question orally, just send a note through the question pane or raise your hand using that function in the GoToMeeting control panel. So this is the third edition of the Pocketbook. I'm sure that most of you are aware of that and have seen the others. It's really become, in that short period of time, one of the flagship publications of the ICCT and certainly of ICCT Europe. We hear frequently how useful it's been to many people across Europe, which is a nice thing for not only program guys but communications guys to hear. Each edition has had some new content or new features added to it. Peter's been very entrepreneurial in that way. One of the most interesting ones thus far has been the companion website, which will be the focus of a good part of today's presentation, and is a very interesting tool, adds another useful layer of information to this. So without further ado then, let me turn it over to Peter.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining this webinar today. My name is Peter Mock. I'm from the Berlin office of ICCT. And I have been working on this Pocketbook together with my colleagues for the last 3 years. And as we have just published our most recent version at the beginning of November, I thought it would be a nice time to give you a short presentation of the Pocketbook. I assume that some of you, or maybe all of you, have already downloaded it and had a look at it. So maybe now is a good time to answer some additional questions that you might have. As Joe already said, I have structured today's presentation into 3 or 4 parts. The first one will be to give you a brief introduction into what is the history of the Pocketbook and how it is structured in its PDF and print version. I would suggest that if you have any questions regarding that part, we will have a short round of question and answering after these 2 points. Then the third one will be to look at some highlights of the 2013 edition, and that's clearly only the ones that I see as highlights. Others may have a different opinion, but I will just show you some charts that I think are interesting. We can have another round of questions if you have any. And then finally, I would like to show you some more details of this online version that Joe just mentioned. Now, starting with this introduction section, as many of you will know, we have now published this Pocketbook for the 3rd time. We started in 2011 with the first one, and then in 2012 switched to a different type of format, and then 2013 pretty much kept to the format from last year, but updated the charts and added a few new ones. I am very often asked if we have something similar for other countries or regions, and the answer is yes, we have that for China. There's a similar Pocketbook or fleet market book available for the Chinese market for 2010. And here on this slide, you can find the link if you are interested in downloading that one. I think I can also say that we have databases and lots of information and data for other regions as well, but we have not published any similar Pocketbook for other regions than Europe and China so far. By the way, I think the slides from this webinar will be made public afterwards. So if you want to, you can download the slides and then follow those links that I have highlighted here. Then what I also would like to mention is that the idea for this European Pocketbook really came from a report from the US Environmental Protection Agency. It's called the Fuel Economy Trends Report. And what it shows is market data and also technology data for cars and light trucks in the US from 1975 to 2012 in its latest edition. And that's a really interesting publication that you can download from the EPA website. That has just a tremendous amount of data and statistics in it. And in 2011, when we started, the idea was that we should also create something similar for Europe. Because what we found was that we have CO2 monitoring information from the European Commission or the European Environmental Agency, but that this information is quite restricted to only a few parameters. And what we try to do in our Pocketbook is to add some more vehicle characteristics or parameters that are not in the CO2 monitoring report. And we try to be broader than the European Environmental Agency in its report. At the same time, it's clear that our data is definitely not the official one. The official monitoring data is being collected by the European Environmental Agency, and it is being made available in its annual report. And this year, there's also what they call a CO2 emissions performance report by manufacturer for the first time, and that I would recommend highly to you if you have not seen that. It's a really interesting report, quite short, but it's summarizing very nicely what has happened during the last year and how the manufacturers are positioned at the moment in terms of CO2 emissions and also some vehicle characteristics. And again, you find the links to those two reports here on the website. In this respect, what I should also say is that what you will sometimes notice in our Pocketbook is that the CO2 numbers and eventually also some other parameters are a little bit different from the numbers that you will find in the official CO2 monitoring data. And that is simply because we use different data sets and different data sources. So always when there is data, for example, for CO2, I would recommend use the official CO2 monitoring data. And for those fields and sections where there's no information in the CO2 monitoring report, then you can use the numbers from our Pocketbook. That's my general recommendation. Regarding data sources, what we use in our Pocketbook is a compilation of different data sources. One of the most important ones that we're using is the POLC data. It's a commercial data provider. We add to it lots of information from the Kraftfahrtbundesamt, for example, the VCA in the UK, so type approval agencies, and from a journal called Automobile Review from Switzerland. We also add information from the manufacturer's websites, from, for example, the ADAC. And as you can imagine, it's quite difficult to link all that together. But in the end, if we manage to do that, then the data that we get from it and the summaries and analysis that we get from it is quite useful, I think. So I will move on now to look at the overall structure of the PDF and the print version of the Pocketbook. And there you can see four main sections. If you open the Pocketbook, what you will find first is an executive summary. That's about 10 pages with text and some charts. I think it's 5 or 6 charts. And those are what I would call some highlights of the Pocketbook. And the text is there to explain what we or how we interpret those charts and what we would read out from those charts. You will find such an interpretation and such a text only in this section. For the other sections, we have on purpose not done that because we just wanted to present the data and the charts and leave it to the reader to interpret those. So that's the first one, the executive summary. Then you have individual chapters. This year we have in total 6 chapters, or 5 chapters if you take out the executive summary. And each chapter will start with what we call, well, creative charts. And that's usually a double-page chart, as you can see here on number 2, with a short text explaining some of the footnote information or background information. Then you will find what is called number 3 here. You will find detailed charts highlighting or summarizing data and data trends over time. And at the end of each chapter, you'll again find a creative chart, a double-page creative chart. And those ones are the ones from last year's edition, from the 2012 edition. What we did is, or what we decided to do is that we don't want to throw those away. So you will always find at the beginning of the chapter the current creative chart, and then at the end of each chapter, the creative chart from last year. So you then have those 6 or 5 different chapters. And at the very end, you have in the annex the detailed tables. That's number 4 here on this page. So for each year and for passenger cars and light commercial vehicles, you will have a double-page table or matrix where you can find the CO2 information, sales information, and other technical parameters by member state, by country, and by manufacturer or brand. So those are the sections of the Pocketbook. What I should also mention is that in the charts themselves, you will usually find the top markets and the top brands and the top, well, not, you will find all vehicle segments, but the top brands and the top markets. Whereas in the tables at the back, you will find all the different member states and all, no, not all the different brands, but as many brands as we could manage to put there in the annex. Regarding the member states, what I should also mention is that we have the EU 15 countries separately, so the Western European countries, and for the quite new countries that joined recently, the EU 10, we have summarized them in one row at the end. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say about the structure. Now, I don't see any questions in the questions box, but just in case that someone would like to ask something regarding the introduction or structure, are there any questions at the moment? Okay, it doesn't seem like it. So I will just move on with the next section, and that would be to highlight some of the charts that I think are most interesting in this year's edition. And I will start with what is the creative chart of the chapter number 2 when it comes to vehicle sales, vehicle stock information. And what you will find there is these world maps that look a little bit strange at the beginning. But what they show is the light-duty vehicle stock in 2010 and 2030, and the same for heavy-duty vehicles. And the size of each country or each region represents the number of vehicles in those markets. The numbers for these charts come from our ICCT Global Transportation Roadmap model. That is a pretty big project of the ICCT that has been going on for many years now, where we have collected vehicle statistics, stock data from around the world, and where we are also trying to model future vehicle numbers and characteristics of future vehicles. And that's where those numbers come from. I think it's a nice visualization. It's a little bit difficult sometimes to see what's happening there, but for example, if you compare the 2010 values and the 2030 values, something that very clearly can be pointed out is the fact that here India, for example, is growing quite significantly. You have about 15 million light-duty vehicles in 2010, and that, according to our numbers, would grow by 600% until 2030. So that's a huge increase of vehicles in India. Same is true for heavy-duty vehicles. And in general, of course, you can see what are the key markets: Europe, the US, China. You can identify that quite quickly, I think. If you want to have more information about the background, about the data that's behind those charts, you can just follow the link provided at the bottom, and that will bring you to the Global Transportation Roadmap Model website, where you can find much more reports and in general data. Okay, the next charts that I would like to highlight are those two, and there's actually a third one. Those are in the second chapter, and they are new. They have not been in the Pocketbook last year, because what we reported last year was just, for example, the number of vehicles sold in each member state by year. And what you could see in those charts, which are, for example, figure 2.1, is that the total number of vehicles decreases over time in Europe, But what was quite difficult to figure out is in which countries is the decrease most prominent, and in which countries is there eventually even an increase in vehicle numbers. And so this year we have included a type of chart that puts 2001, or that sets 2001 as 100%, and then you can see quite clearly what's happening over time. So in this first case here for 2.2, you can see that the number of vehicles in Spain and Italy decreased quite dramatically by about 50% in Spain, 40% in Italy. Whereas, for example, in Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, the number of vehicles remained relatively constant or even increased over time. The same is true here for 2.4. You can see that for most of the vehicle segments, the number of vehicles decreased or remained constant. And for the SUV market, the number of vehicles increased dramatically by about 300 or 350%. So those are new charts, and I hope they will help you interpret the data more easily than last year. Then moving to what is the creative charts for, I think, let me have a look. Yeah, it's chapter 3, fuel consumption and CO2 emissions. There you will find a double-page chart that shows some selected vehicle models that were available in 2012 in Europe. And in the Pocketbook itself, what you will find is a quite complex y-axis where you have CO2 information, but also fuel consumption and costs, fuel costs. The reasoning behind that was that we wanted to show that CO2, fuel consumption, and fuel costs are directly linked to each other. And so if we're talking about CO2, we are at the same time also talking about costs for consumers. In this version that I show here, it's a little bit simplified. You will only see fuel consumption on the y-axis, but it's pretty much the same chart. And there's one more difference. In the Pocketbook itself, you will find on the x-axis engine power. And here in this chart, you will find the weight of the vehicles on the x-axis. The reason is that the European CO2 regulation is still based on vehicle weight. And so this chart here is in some cases more useful than the one in the Pocketbook itself. You can find this chart that I'm showing here using the link provided at the bottom of this page. Now, what you see here is, in my opinion, that first of all, there's a lot of different vehicle technologies that you can think of. So we have just general gasoline vehicles, gasoline hybrid, diesel hybrid, and so on and so forth, including electric vehicles. What you don't find here is fuel cell vehicles because they have not been for sale in 2012, but all the other vehicle models that you see here are for sale at the moment. And so, for example, you can find that the Volkswagen Golf, the most prominent vehicle in Europe, in its top-selling version in 2012, had a fuel consumption that was around 4.8 liters, I think, for the gasoline version, and around 4 liters for the diesel version. And there's also a Volkswagen Golf version with 3.2 liters, which is down here. And so, because that's relatively close to the EU average vehicle, that is, I think, a quite interesting indication of how we could meet the future targets, most prominently the 95-gram target for 2020. If you use technologies like they are used in today's Golf, then we are pretty much there. And it's mostly about deploying those technologies across the fleet and across the market to make future targets. What's also interesting is that, for example, if you look here at the more heavy vehicles like the Mercedes-Benz E-Class, you can find that also for those vehicles there exist technologies to even today meet future targets. And in this case, the Mercedes-Benz that you'll find here is a normal diesel vehicle that comes relatively close to the 2020 target line. But then if you look at this vehicle here, that's a Mercedes E-Class diesel hybrid vehicle already for sale today. And that would already today meet the 2020 target. Again, it's mostly, in my opinion, about deploying those technologies into the mass market for the future. But those technologies are available today in principle and can be already purchased by customers. Then you'll find a number of plug-in vehicles here in yellow. And then, of course, the pure battery electric vehicles in red, having 0 emissions, because we're just looking here at the tailpipe emissions. Okay, I think that's enough being said for this chart. I would then move to the next one, which is 3.16. And that one we have included for the last 3 years. It's showing the CO2 emissions over vehicle weight. And what you can see is the trend of increasing vehicle weight has continued for 2012. And we can more and more see that the 2009 decrease that we have been seeing was mostly due to the economic crisis, to the scrappage programs that were in place at that time. And since then, vehicle weight has increased again, so that we are back where we have been on this trend of increasing weight over time. The next chart I wanted to highlight is this creative chart for the chapter 4. And chapter 4 is about vehicle technologies. And what we wanted to look at this here is specifically at hybrid vehicles. So on the left side, what we have done is we have looked at how many hybrid vehicles have been sold in Europe in 2001, 2009, and 2012. And you can see that there was a huge increase from around 2,000 vehicles in 2001 to about 130,000 vehicles in 2012. What you can also see that is that it all started with the Toyota Prius and a little bit the Honda Insight in 2001. So Toyota Prius had a market share of 95% among all hybrid cars in Europe in 2001. And then in 2009, there were more hybrid vehicles available. And finally, in 2012, there were quite some hybrid vehicles available on the market. And you can see that, for example, the Toyota Prius only has a market share of 16% now. There's this Toyota Prius Alpha version with another 7%. But it's more spread out across different vehicle models these days. What you can still see is that Toyota still has a very high market share. If you sum up the Toyota models and the Lexus models, that's, I think, around 15% market. It's more market share for the hybrid vehicles, but Toyota is now selling about 15% of its vehicles as hybrid vehicles in Europe. On the right side, you can see the market shares of different vehicle technologies of fuels in different regions, also for the 3 years. And what I find quite interesting is here, if you look at the European numbers, we have about 1% hybrid vehicles in 2012. In the Netherlands, it's around 5% now. In the US, it's also around 5%, and in Japan, it's around 20% of hybrid vehicles in 2012. You can also, of course, see the diesel market share is highest in Europe, and then, of course, almost no diesel market share in the US, and pretty much no diesels in Japan. Okay, I will continue then. I think there's 2 more that I wanted to highlight. This one here, table 6.1. It's not so much about the table because that's, of course, just the emission limits for vehicles in Europe. That's nothing new. But what I wanted to point out is that we have a website together with DieselNet that's called transportpolicy.net. And if you go to that website, you will find, for example, this table with the emission limits, but much more information regarding the regulation in different regions around the world. And we try to update that frequently so that you usually should find all the latest technical but also regulatory information for the different vehicle types and different regions around the world. So if you are working in this area, it might be worth checking out that website. And that's all I want to say about this one. The final one I wanted to highlight is this chart, which is figure 1.5 in the Pocketbook. And that's actually a chart that comes from another report that we published in May this year. And that one was looking at the real-world fuel consumption of vehicles over time. And for this one, we have collected huge amounts of data from leasing companies, but also from websites, consumer websites, always looking at the real-world fuel consumption of cars and compared that to the type approval, laboratory CO2 emissions or fuel consumption values. And what we found is that there's a trend of an increasing gap between those 2 values, and that while in 2001, the difference between type approval and real-world CO2 emissions was around 8%, it is now around, 20 to 30% depending on the data source. But the trend for all the different data sources is pretty much the same. It's a strongly increasing gap. And this report that you can find on our website provides more information on the data behind that and also gives you some details on what we think could be the reasons behind that. So that might also be worth looking at. Okay, so that concludes this third section about the highlights of the 2013 edition. And I can see at least one question. If anyone else has any question, please feel free to ask those now. And I'm looking at that question that Darren provided. Okay, so Darren Novak asked if I could explain the terms lower medium and upper medium vehicles. This question about vehicle segments is a question that I receive quite often, and so I should explain how we classify vehicles. That classification comes from PORC, so it's not something that the ICCT does, it's something that is provided by PORC when we get the vehicle data from them. That also includes one column that's called vehicle segment. And there is, if you are interested in the details, I can forward that to you. There is a small booklet from PORC that provides a detailed description of how they classify vehicles. Generally, they try to do that using technical parameters, for example, the size of the vehicle or even the weight of the vehicle. But then I think there's also some visual elements that they use for their classification. So they look at vehicles and try to, if the technical parameters are not clear, and there's vehicles that have the same vehicle, the technical parameters, but look differently, they use those visual elements as well. So generally, to answer that specific question from Darren, if I look at the, just 1 second, lower medium. So we have, if I look at a lower medium car, I think the typical example of a lower medium car would be a Volkswagen Golf, should be a Volkswagen Golf. Whereas the upper medium vehicle, that should be something like a Volkswagen Passat, if I'm not completely wrong. I would have to check that specifically to give you some examples, but I think those are two good example vehicles for those two categories, the Golf and Passat. In general, as I said, if you're interested in more details, what I would suggest is I forward you those details from PORC on their classification system. So I hope that answers this question. Are there any more questions? I'm not seeing any so far. Okay, if that's not the case, I will move on. I was not expecting that this webinar is going to take long, so that's okay, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask at any time. So the last part I wanted to cover during this webinar is to provide you some explanation about this online version that Joe mentioned. So for the first time, what we have done is we have created also a website, an online version of the Pocketbook, where we have not included all the different charts that we have in the printed version or the PDF version, but some of those. And the idea is that we will continue working on that in the future. And we might add some new charts to it and some new tables to it that are maybe not in the printed version. So we have more possibilities and can be more creative in that online version, I think. So the link to that site is provided here. It's called eupocketbook.theicct.org. And I will now try to jump to that website so that I can show you how it looks like. So I hope you will now see that website, and I hope it's large enough for you to look at it. If not, then you can try to somehow zoom in using the GoToWebinar. I'm not entirely sure how you do that, but Joe said there is a way how you can zoom into the screen using the GoToWebinar. Okay, I hope you can follow me.
Just to jump in, Peter, most of if people want to do that, there's a Zoom feature in the upper left of your GoToWebinar viewer screen if anyone needs to do that.
Okay, thanks, Joe. So now looking at the website, usually what you see first when you go to that website is something called featured charts. And that's just a selection of charts that we think might be most interesting to people. but that's not necessarily the case. So what I would suggest is you could just go directly to the section called charts. And if you do that, it will look somehow like this. So you will have at the top some sort of filter that you can apply. And at the bottom, you will have quite a number of charts. I think it's 5 pages or so that you can scroll through if you want to. Okay, but so if you're looking for one specific chart, you can filter. And right now I have a filter applied that's only showing the charts that include fuel consumption and CO2 information. If I want to see all the charts, I of course have to unclick that one or reset. And then I see all the different charts. I think it will take some time for you to refresh, so I'm doing it slowly, but you should now be able to see more charts than before. And again, if I apply that filter, I only see, in this case, the charts that include information on CO2 and fuel consumption. So if I now click on the first one on that chart, it's called CO2 information. So it's called passenger car, PC, CO2 emissions by member state. If I click on this one, then I see the chart here. And now I have all the possibilities of that interactive tool, because now I can not only look at the chart, but I can also make changes to it. I can include more member states if I want to. So right now I have selected only a few of them. I could now include, let's say, Austria, Belgium, and Denmark. And then it will take a little bit of time, and the lines for those countries are being added. What I can also do is I can go into the chart, I can point at one of those, and I can see the values. So for example, here, Germany, 2011, 147 grams per kilometer of CO2. I think that's clear. The benefit of this type of chart is then that we can also include more countries or more brands, manufacturer brands, than in the printed version, because in the printed version we always have the problem that if we include, let's say, more than 10 manufacturers, you will not be able to interpret the chart anymore, because it's just a mess. In this online version, you have the possibility to select yourself what you want to see. So you can select the favorite manufacturers, brands, or member states, and then show those. I think that's clear. Now, what's a little bit difficult, and what I will show you is what if you want to export the information that you're seeing here. What you have to do then is to go here to the bottom, and there's a little arrow. It's called export, and that you can use to export the data into Excel or other formats if you want to. Now, it's a little bit tricky, because what you have to do is, before you export, you have to click in the chart somewhere in, I would suggest the white area here. And the reason is because if you don't do that, then there's a risk that you have selected one of the lines. And if you do that, then it only exports the data for this one line or this one row. So always click on the white area of the chart, and then afterwards go to export. And then you can select well, image or PDF, but that doesn't really make sense. So you can select data or crosstab. For example, if I select crosstab, then it says the crosstab has been generated. I then click on download, and I have to open it in Excel now. But then here I get all the data. I don't know if you can see that, but I get all the underlying data for this chart that I have exported. So I hope that will be useful to some of you who are working with data and need the raw data. Okay, so I think that's it for the charts. The other thing that I wanted to show you is the data. So here next to the chart section, you have a data section, and there you will find 6 tables. That is 3 tables for passenger cars and 3 tables for light commercial vehicles. The table set 1 is by member state, then the next one by brand, and the last one by segment. And so the member state and brands tables you will also find in the printed version, but this segment table you will not find in the printed version, because there was simply no space for it. So I think that's also a benefit of this online version, that we can now include the data by segment. So if I open the passenger car data by segment table, what you will see is the segments here on the y-axis basically, and then you have the different years on the x-axis. And right now, what is selected is the sales and registration numbers. What I can do, for example, now I can select another parameter. I can, if I want to, let's say, look at the diesel market share. So now I see the diesel market shares. I can only, here in the segment area, I can now deselect some of the segments that I'm not interested in, which makes it easier to compare the data. And I can, here in the years section, I can exclude some of the years, which will also make it easier to read the chart. But I think that is hopefully self-explaining. And then again, if you want to export the data, same as for the tables, you go to export here at the bottom. And before you do that, again, please click somewhere, well, not in the white area, but here, for example, I think if you click on segment, just click once on segment and then here on export. And then if you go to data or cross tab, that will export the table for you. If you don't click on segment or in a general area here, then there's a risk again that it will only export the data for 1 year or the data for one segment, and that's not what you want usually. Okay, well, and that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I think that should explain how the website works for now. As I said, we will try to put more information there, and especially for next year, we hope to have more charts and more table data in that online version. And in the meantime, if you have any suggestions or any feedback, then please provide that to us, and we can hopefully improve the website and also improve the printed and PDF version of the Pocketbook over time. So now, if you have any questions, please ask them. That is, I would say, your last chance for this webinar. If not, then you can always ask me by email or give me a call if you're interested. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions.
Oh, looks like there's a couple.
There is one. Okay, from Jens. Jens is asking, will there be a similar website for non-EU markets? Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say not in the short term, because it takes a lot of data and effort to put together such a pocketbook, and especially the website, and it's also very costly. So I don't think we are seeing that anytime soon, but in the long run, I could imagine that some other program areas or some other regions of the ICCT will work on something similar, and then we might see that. But for now, I would say more not. Okay. Well, I guess, Joe, then I will hand it over again back to you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you all for attending. Just want to mention a couple of things. The slides will be available online. In fact, the easiest place to get them, the easiest way to get anything really related to Europe that the ICCT is working on is to go to the icct.org/Europe. The slides will be available there. I don't think we have a URL for them yet. Also, the webinar has been recorded, and so a recording of the webinar will be available as well if you'd like to maybe send the link to anyone. I'd encourage those of you who are interested in keeping up with ICCT's publications, releases, and other things to take a look at our RSS feed, or I think most of you have signed up already to the mailing list, but if you haven't, please do, and tell all your friends. As Peter said, feel free to get in touch with us if you have any questions or any follow-ups on this. We would welcome suggestions for improving the website in particular and the Pocketbook. As I said, Peter is with each edition has added some new layers of information, and I think he's eager to do that again. So please feel free to get in touch with either him by email, peter@theicct.org, or me, joe@theicct.org. And Peter, unless you have anything else, I think we're done here.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and please feel free to ask any questions at any time.
Very good. Thank you all.